Next month. This month marks the 40th anniversary of the Special Olympics. They got their start right here in Chicago at Soldier Field in July of 1968. The Games were originally supposed to be a one-time athletic competition for young people with intellectual disabilities, but 40 years later the event has gone global and is more popular than ever. Joining me to talk about this weekend's anniversary festivities are two people key to the success of the Special Olympics: Merchandise Mart President Chris Kennedy and Illinois Supreme Court Justice Ann Burke. And welcome back, both of you, to Chicago Tonight. Justice Burke, let me begin with you because you were there at the beginning. You created the concept of the Games. How did that concept come to you?
Well, actually, the Greeks created the concept of Olympics, but what I was doing, I was a young phys ed teacher for the Chicago Park District.
You're only 23.
At the time of the Games, but when I started teaching children with disabilities, it was in 1965, so I was even much younger then. But I taught children everything. The kids just ate up everything, because at that time, you have to remember, there was nothing for persons with disabilities. There was no public education. They were still housed in institutions primarily across the country, or moms and dads kept them at home and didn't even tell family members that they had a handicapped child. So
specifically, people with intellectual handicaps. You were saying that, at that time they were called mentally retarded.
Absolutely. And so, I was a young woman. I was volunteered for the Chicago Park District to be a phys ed teacher for those persons, and fell in love, of course. And they learned to swim. They learned to twirl a baton, tap dance, track and field, everything.
So you saw these activities, and when did the light bulb go off one day, and you thought, wow, we could do something like this?
It hadn't happened that way. We did track and field at our park, at West Blooming Park on the southeast side. But the key point was when President Bill McFetridge of the Park District and the Vice President Dan Shannon, who was a former Notre Dame football player, came to the park to see our closing night of camp. We put on Mary Poppins, and they were astonished. They had never seen mentally retarded children. And they said, well, how many people are like this in the city of Chicago? I don't know, because that time nobody knew. Well, what can we do to make more parents bring their kids to the parks? It's free. They should be out here. They should be learning too. And I said, I don't know, maybe just put a track meet on. But it was actually Dr. William Freeberg from Southern Illinois University, who I had met previously, who was a former director of the Kennedy Foundation, said, I called and said, can you help me with this concept? Sure, but you have to call Mrs. Shriver, Eunice Kennedy Shriver. So he and I actually drafted a proposal to put on a track meet, and Mrs. Shriver answered. And
Chris Kennedy, what have you heard in family lore of how this event came to be?
Well, I'd say that, in our family, we value sports. It's something that's been passed along from generation to generation. My grandfather, Joe Kennedy, played first base at the Harvard baseball team, and he wanted all of his children to play sports as well. One of my aunts, Rosemary, growing up in that large family, suffered from what was then called mental retardation. And, they had great access to terrific medical care and advice, and all of those professionals said, keep her in the house, don't let her out, she can't participate. And her sisters and her brothers knew better. And they took her down to the beach, they took her swimming, they took her out sailing, they played ball with her, and they knew that sports were a great way to tease out those great abilities that were hidden from everybody's view.
Because in a family of considerable achievement, as with any family of achievement back in those days, to have somebody with intellectual disability, there was a tremendous stigma to that.
Yeah, and I think that the great lesson of the Special Olympics is that by teasing out those great abilities with sports, we learned that these children, young adults, could play any sport. They could be enthusiastic. They weren't putting themselves at risk. And maybe if they could play sports, they could learn to work a little bit. And if they learned to work a little bit, they could work a lot. And then they could live by themselves. And then finally they could participate fully in every aspect of American life.
Let's continue with the story, though, of the inception. Ann Burke, okay, so you came up, a couple of you came up with this proposal. You approached Eunice Kennedy. Yes. What was that encounter like?
It was, well, first of all, she didn't accept our proposal the way it was written. She said, oh, you got to add this, you got to add that. So we redid it, and finally she said, this shouldn't just be Chicago. This should be, the whole country. And I know people all over the place. And the first Games did include 23 states that were contacted by Eunice herself to bring people, because she knew people all around the country. So we had 23 states in Canada participate, 1,000 children on the field. No one in the stands fell, no one. in the stands because people, even Tribune charities, I went to them for money, they said, oh no, you're putting these kids on display. That was what we were running up against. But what was really exciting was to see the parents realize that their child can do things. So the child became a member of the family again, and they could go bowling together, they could do things together, and that was the skill. The idea was to teach skills so the child can be participating in family experience. And Mrs. Shriver took it to the global effect. She said this should be done every place. And that's when she started the National Special Olympic Program. And now it's global. My husband and I and son and daughter went to Shanghai this past October. There were 85,000 people in Shanghai in the stands. There were 170 plus countries participating, celebrating people with abilities.
Chris, why do you think it's caught on so much? I mean, all these countries, you know, the increased number of people participating. What's the hook?
I think there's, you know, the idea of human rights, of basic rights, of civil rights as part of the great history, certainly of, you know, the American experiment, and that's really the greatest thing that we've ever exported around the world is this idea of natural rights, of civil rights, of human rights. And I think the Special Olympics movement is really a physical, tangible evidence of the rights that all of us have to something greater than you know, the ideas that people could contain us.
Are you in touch with any of the athletes who were there in 1968?
Oh, yes.
Well, tell me about them.
Well, I have one young woman who's 55 now, and we're pen pals. She writes. She works at a local grocery store on the southeast side. And when I got sworn into the appellate court, she read for me, you know, the Pledge of Allegiance. A lot of my students are still around, and they'll be there on Saturday celebrating at Soldier Field.
Do they ever talk about how the event impacted their lives? What do they say to you?
It's changed their lives. It's changed their families. And like Chris said, you know, they're working in workshops. They've gone to school, which really didn't exist in 1965. There was no public education for persons with disabilities, in our lifetime. So it's changed our perception of what they can do, and there's many more things we need to do for them as well. But the families couldn't be better. I mean, they didn't think these children could do anything, and now they know they can do anything they try to do.
All right, tell us what's happening this weekend on Saturday when you have this big shindig.
Well, I think the greatest thing is that everybody's invited, and there's terrific ways for everybody to pitch in and
it's
help.
Free,
and it's free, and the parking is free. And how many times do you get free parking down at Soldier Field? For that reason alone, yes. Just to say that you parked for free, you ought to come on down.
And Burke, last question for you. Long after all of us are gone, you will probably be remembered as the person who was, you know, there at its inception. That's not a bad legacy.
It's hard to believe, but there were so many other people, you know, that helped. I was just the conduit. The Park District had put on so many programs, Pan Am Games and everything, and without Eunice and the family and the Mayor Richard J. Daley. But for him, this wouldn't exist. He's the one who said, yes, we're going to do it. He's the one, and his legacy should be the Special Olympics.
Chris Kennedy, Justice Burke, thank you both for being here. Good luck this weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you'd like more information about the Special Olympics this weekend at Soldier Field, you can log on to our website at WTTW.com/Chicago-Tonight. And we have an unusual tour for you.